Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. So today we will be beginning the lecture series on gait, wherein I have been allotted the topic of gait cycle, like an overview, and followed by this we'll be having a couple of lectures where we discuss about biomechanics at the foot and ankle, at the knee, at the hip, and something about pathological gait and liver arm functions in CP. So I would be giving an overall broad perspective about what exactly to look for and what entails all of these other mechanisms in very brief. So to begin with, I will briefly discuss the concepts regarding the prerequisites of normal gait, which were introduced by Dr. Jacqueline Perry, whose book I have referenced everywhere and is one, and she is also one of the founding figures of modern gait analysis. She has described five prerequisites to gait, starting with fit foot pre-positioning. That is, the foot should land in the correct place, should have adequate step length, should have good clearance of the foot in swing phase, stability in the stance phase, and there should be energy conservation in gait. These five are very important for the gait to be normal. If any of these five aspects are affected by disease or by injury or any pathology, then obviously we will have an adverse impact on the overall gait pattern. So, what is a gait cycle? Is all the events that occur from foot contact to when the foot contacts the ground again constitute a gait cycle, to put it very, very, very simply. So all of us know that one gait cycle is divided into stance phase and swing phase. First part is when the foot is in contact with the ground, which is also called the stance phase. The next part is the swing phase of the gait when the foot is off the ground, and it is called the swing phase. The stance phase accounts for up to 62% of the time and swing phase accounts for 38%. We should also understand that the gait cycle of the two limbs, that is the left and the right lower limb, do not occur at the same time. And there is a difference in the timing of those two. If the difference was not there, we would be that is what happens when we are hopping and not walking. So, in order for us to have a reciprocal gait, there is a carefully coordinated timing and interplay between the gait cycle of the right and left lower limbs. So here you can see that I have put the two gait cycles of the left and right lower limbs side by side, where we can see that there are specific periods of overlap. When the stance phase of both the lower limbs coincide, these periods are called double support periods. It is when both the right and left leg are in contact with the ground. After this double support period, there is a moment where the contralateral limb goes into swing, and this is called a single leg support. And then again, when the right leg goes into swing and the left leg comes back to normal and reaches the ground, we have one more double support period, which is called the terminal double support period. So we have an initial double support period, a single leg support period, and a terminal double support period. A, a different relationship exists among the subdivisions of stance. Walking faster proportionately is going to lengthen the single stance and shorten the two double stance intervals. Whereas the reverse is also true when a person is walking slowly. So it's the single leg support period of one limb equals the swing of the other as they are occurring at the same time, as you can see in this image that I have put. So initially we started with stance and swing, and then we have divided stance into three subgroups. Initial double support period, which is also called the loading response, and the terminal double support period, which is the pre-swing, as it precedes the swing phase of the gait cycle. So then again, the single leg stance is divided into two periods called the mid stance and the terminal stance. Mid stance is when the weight acceptance proceeds and the body reaches over the stance phase limb, and the body weight crosses the midline in the sagittal plane. Initial swing, middle swing, and terminal swing are the three parts of the swing phase which are in relation to the stance phase limb. So, swing and stance have essentially different purposes. The purpose of swing phase is to advance the limb. It advances the limb so that we can take the next step forward. The purpose of the stance phase is to advance the body over the planted foot. So stance phase has all to do with advancing the body over the stance phase limb, and the swing phase is to advance the leg. So they serve kind of, mutually coordinated yet different purposes. So I want to emphasize the difference between what is stride and what is step. So stride is the descriptive term for one gait cycle, whereas step is the interval between the initial contact periods of opposite limbs. So, interval between the two initial contacts of the same limb is called a stride or a gait cycle. So, gait cycle is a stride, whereas what is a step is between the initial contact periods of the same limb. So, these two cannot be used interchangeably, is what I want to say. So, why do these phases of gait exist? Because each stride or gait cycle requires changing body foot alignment in stance and selective limb advancement in swing phase. These reactions create repetitive motion patterns at the hip, knee, and ankle. And each of these patterns have a different functional demand, which then are designated a particular phase of the gait. So, modern gait analysis recognizes 8 functional phases per stride. You can see a strip at the bottom that I've put here. This strip will be there from this slide to the end of the PPT so that it will be repeated over and over again, and so that we don't miss out or we don't forget, and it will be ingrained in our memory also. So initially what happened, the older conventions was they used to use separate phrases to determine normal events. For example, heel strike. So that phase is redundant these days, that phrase, because we have stopped using generic words and we use more function based terminology so that we can avoid ambiguity when we discuss different pathological gaits. So what are those terms, we will see as the lecture proceeds. And so analyzing gait by the phases directly links joint motions to their functional roles at that particular instant. It helps us correlate simultaneous hip knee ankle motions into whole limb patterns, and that's why we have an easier way to assess the position of all the joints at particular stage in the gait. So the framework goes as such that there are 8 phases and 3 basic tasks. The 3 basic core tasks of walking are weight acceptance, single limb support, and swing limb advancement. And the 8 phases are the ones which I have put down in the stripe. So, functional, this is like a functional division of the gait cycle, wherein stride is what I've said is the gait cycle. The periods are stance and swing phase, and the phases are initial contact, LR, loading response, mid stance, terminal stance, and pre swing. These are the phases of the stance period. Then, the phases of the swing period are initial swing, mid swing, terminal swing, and the tasks are weight acceptance, single leg support, and swing limb advancement. So I will talk about the 3 tasks, and then I will start talking about the periods, and I will describe the gait as per the periods. So weight acceptance is the most demanding moment of the walk, impact, stability, and forward motion, like forward progression all at once. So the challenge of the weight acceptance is when the whole body weight comes onto the limb, and how the body is going to react to it is what is weight acceptance. And the phases involved in this are initial contact and loading response. Then comes the single limb support. So from contralateral toe off to its next contact, one limb is going to carry everything while we still move forward. That is why it is called the single limb support period. This includes the mid stance and the terminal stance. So swing limb advancement actually starts in the late stance period. Pre-swing is going to set the table, and then the limb passes through the 3 swing postures to lift, advance to full stride length, and position for the next initial contact. This all must sound very technical, but as I start explaining more and more, by the end of this, I think all of this should ideally make sense. Now we will study the gait cycle by periods, divide them into stance and swing phase, and we will discuss where the phases in these periods lie with respect to the tasks that I have just spoken. So, stance phase includes all the event that happen from the initial contact until the foot is off. That is, until the foot leaves the ground. It comprises of initial contact, loading response, mid stance, terminal stance, and pre-swing. So, coming to the initial contact, this phase includes the instant the foot drops on the floor and the immediate reaction to the onset of the body weight transfer. The joint postures present at this time determines the limb's loading response pattern. The hip is flexed, the knee is extended, and the ankle is dorsiflexed to neutral. This was initially called the heel strike, but we should understand that not everyone is going to walk with the heel strike first. In some cases, it may be foot flat, some cases, it might be on the forefoot. Therefore, Heel strike, I would say, is a type of initial contact, and it is now called initial contact. It's no longer called heel strike as per recent literature. And then then comes the loading response. It is basically when the limb touches the ground and the body weight is getting accepted by the leg. So now we know that from Newton's third law, that whenever there is contact between two objects, and as the two objects, suppose A and B, come into contact, A comes in contact with B is going to exert an equal and opposite force, and so that every action is going to have an equal and opposite reaction. So just as our body is going to touch the ground will exert an equal and opposite force back to the body. So this is what is called GRF, or ground reaction force. So loading response is basically the response of our body to the ground reaction force. So in a way, loading response is like our body preparing to accept the ground reaction force. So this is a variant of the double support period, wherein there is a period of weight acceptance, as we have discussed. Here it is going to pass posteriorly to the ankle joint. The ground reaction force passes posteriorly to the ankle joint during loading response. And at this phase of the gait cycle, the tibialis anterior works eccentrically in order to prevent rapid plantar flexion of the foot. So here the GRF passes posteriorly to the ankle. The tib ant is working eccentrically to gradually allow the foot to land very gently on the ground. This, we should all remember, is a passive movement, and it is controlled by eccentric activity of the tib ant. This phase is also called the first rocker of the gait. So the first rocker of the gait is passive plantar flexion of the ankle, which is controlled by eccentric action of the tib band. So just to touch, okay, what will happen if this fails to occur is what we get. What happens when we get a foot drop type of gait. So this is the first rocker. So the second phase is the mid stance. During mid stance, the leg is fully on the ground and the weight is moving forward towards the plantar leg, as shown by the red arrow here. And then there is a passive dorsiflexion at the ankle of the ankle on the planted foot, which is a closed chain kinetic movement. I think we all know what these movements are. It is when the distal aspect of the extremity is fixed to an object that is stationary. So when the distal part is fixed, movement at any one joint in this kinetic chain requires motion as well at the other joints as well. So during mid stance, the foot is fully on the ground and the weight is moving towards the planted leg, as we saw. There is a passive dorsiflexion of the ankle on the planted foot, which is a closed kinetic movement. This is the period of the second rocker of the gait, when the foot is behind and the body is moving forward over the planted foot. This is the period of the second rocker. And this is the time at which the center of mass, denoted by the pink dot here, reaches the highest point, which is called the zenith, during mid stance. Okay. So during mid stance, there is progressive extension of the hip by the gluteus maximus, which is a powerful hip extensor. The knee is also extending progressively, but the knee extension is a passive movement, whereas the hip extension is an active movement. We saw that any passive dorsiflexion that is happening is controlled by the opposite muscle, just like in the first rocker of the gait. Passive plantar flexion was being controlled by the eccentric contraction of the tib band. Here, the passive dorsiflexion is going to be controlled by the soleus. Otherwise, we will end up with a sudden dorsiflexion without control. Okay. We are done with the first and second rocker. So just to like touch up upon it, there is a passive dorsiflexion at the ankle. The tibia moves forward on the planted foot, which is being controlled by the eccentric contraction of the soleus, as shown in the figure here. So, so there is a eccentric contraction of the soleus, which is going to pull the tibia back and allow the ground reaction force to pass anterior to the knee. The minute the ground reaction force passes anterior to the knee without any active quadriceps activity, also the knee will passively extend. So this is like a energy conservation mechanism of the body, by which just using the ground reaction force, the body is able to get work done without wasting any energy. And so this is also one of the energy conservation mechanisms that happen during the gait cycle. So here the center of mass is at the zenith. Suppose what happens if someone is not able to have this good soleus or gastrosoleus action, and he's not able to pull the tibia back to allow the GRF to pass anteriorly to the knee. Just like how it happens in crouch, they will need a lot of overactivity of the quadriceps in order to maintain the body weight against the gravity, or else the child is going to collapse to the ground. So in crouch gait, there is a lack of ability to get passive knee extension in mid stance, and that is why there is crouch gait. I think we will discuss more about this in the subsequent lectures. Now, coming to the terminal stance phase, where the body is getting prepared to get the foot off the ground and move into the swing phase. So, here the center of mass has reached the zenith and it is going to move forward, and it will eventually go down to its lowest point, which is called the nadir. So, in terminal stance, the gastrosoleus is still working to prevent further forward progression of the tibia, and therefore, by the action of the soleus, the rocker is going to shift from the tibia to the second metatarsal, and there is going to be a smooth progression from the second rocker to the third rocker. So this is like a series of images which I'm going to show. This is the first rocker, the second rocker, and then the soleus is going to act and gonna, and then you can see that you have the third rocker. I'm going to play it again. First rocker, second rocker, third rocker, and then you have. Okay. So now we will discuss the last phase of the stance phase, which is the pre-swing. So let us see what exactly happens here. Now during pre-swing, we will have our terminal double support stance period, which means that the opposite leg has reached the ground and the ipsilateral limb is getting ready for swing and the weight has shifted to the other side. And this is the phase at which the gastrosoleus is going to propel the body and give us the very powerful push off that we know about. Around 50 to 60% of power generation that happens during normal gait happens during the terminal stance and pre-swing. So pre-swing is a very important phase because that is what gives one the push off and the power to be able to propel the body forward. In pre-swing, the most anterior margin of the medial forefoot and the great toe serve as the base for accelerated limb advancement, and the elastic recoil of the plantar flexors thrusts the tibia forward. So our stance phase is over, the leg is going to go into the swing phase. And as we saw that there are three parts to the swing phase, the initial swing, mid swing, and the terminal swing, after which we will again go back to the initial contact period. Okay. So in the initial swing, there is flexion of the hip, which is caused by rapid swinging of the limb, which provides propulsive force, which is powered by the eccentric contraction of the iliopsoas gracilis and the anterior hip adductors. All these three muscles act together to flex the hip. This adds like a power stroke that happens during gait. The knee flexion is controlled by the short head of biceps. The reason only the short head of biceps works is because this is the only muscle that is not going to cross the hip joint. All the other hamstrings do cross the hip joint and they are accessory hip extensors. Therefore, we only the short head of biceps is active so that we get a smooth hip and knee flexion together. And the foot has to be cleared off the ground so the tibialis anterior works concentrically to dorsiflex the ankle so that the foot does not touch the ground and we get good ground clearance to move forward. So here we have the hip flexors, iliopsoas gracilis and the anterior hip adductors, which flex the hip up. The short head of the biceps working to flex the knee and the tibialis anterior to dorsiflex the ankle. So let's move on to mid swing now, where the trailing limb is going to cross the stance phase limb and is going to move ahead of the stance phase limb. So this is a passive movement. There is very minimal muscle activity because of the rapid and powerful contraction of iliopsoas. We have seen that in the initial swing phase that there is a lot of energy that is generated during that. So that momentum is just going to get carry forward in the mid swing. So there is an analogy that is like people use to describe this is like you have to think of this as an arrow that has left the bow and is now mid flight. So the swing phase limb that is in the mid swing is going to act like an arrow that is in mid flight. Matlab it already has the momentum, it just has to carry it forward. and the tibialis anterior thus continue to act to keep the foot and dorsiflexion. Now the leg is going to get ready to go back and touch the ground. So this is the complementary pre-swing. Pre-swing, we all know that we saw is a stance phase event where the limb is getting ready for swing, and the terminal swing is a swing phase event where the limb is getting ready for stance phase. But these are basically like opposite sides of the same coin. There is extension at the knee so that the limb can go and touch the ground again. Ideally, that should happen in heel strike, but may not happen. So, how does this knee extension occur? This knee extension happens by transferring the momentum that was given to the hip, and from there, the hamstrings just work eccentrically. And them being hip extensors, they stop the hip flexion, and when the hip flexion suddenly stops, the knee is hanging free there. So it just basically extends passively from there. So this is also one of the energy conservation mechanisms where the hip is flexing, the hamstrings work eccentrically, and because of that, the knee extends. So the hip is flexing, the hamstrings suddenly stop the hip flexion, and then the knee extends. So like this. So to summarize, there are two main periods of the gait cycle, the stance and the swing. Stance has to do with weight acceptance and single limb support. Swing has limb advancement. So weight acceptance is initial contact and loading response. Single limb support is mid stance, terminal stance, and part of the pre-swing. Limb advancement is accomplished through initial swing, middle swing, and terminal swing. So I think I have covered the basic everything of the gait cycle, and the other normal foot and ankle patterns and gait deviations in all of the other joints are going to be covered in the subsequent lectures. Thank you.
So how much has everyone understood? Come on, boys and girls. Stop the recording, I think, Bhushan.